Israel sits 2,300 kilometers away from Iran, yet these two countries are sworn enemies. Well, I'm Colonel DJS Chehal, and in this video, we will look at the reasons for animosity between Israel and Iran. But before we do that, we'll have to delve into a little bit of history of both these nations. Now, we are all aware that Israel came into existence in the year 1948, when an area which was originally called the Palestine, and it was held with the British as part of the British mandate ever since the collapse of Ottoman Empire after the First World War. So this area called the Palestine was divided between the Jews who were being persecuted in especially Germany and in Europe, who were coming and settling here, and between the Arabs who were the original inhabitants of this place. Now the division that happened gave away 78% of land to Jews and 22% to the Palestinians who were the original inhabitants. So this disposition resulted in huge displacement. There was good about 750,000 Palestinians that were displaced from home. There were stories of massacres and atrocities committed during this disposition. So eventually the 5 Arab nations surrounding Israel, they decided to attack Israel on 14th May 1948 when it declared its independence. So these countries are Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan and Iraq. However, because of the presence of a strong Trans-Jordan British trained troops as also US, the Palestinians were able to fend off the attacks, and they were able to establish a territorial line which is called the Green Line, which separates their territory, the Israeli territory, from the Arab territories of various nations. So the Green Line was established in 1948. However, the Palestinians naturally felt that their land has been taken over by these outsiders, and therefore in the year 1967, 3 nations, that is Egypt, Jordan and Syria, they decided to attack Israel. So the combined forces of these 3 nations attacked Israel, but because of once again a very strong support from the West, especially US, the Israelis were able to in fact capture some of the territories of these 3 nations. In fact, they took over the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. They were able to capture the Golan Heights in Syria, and they were able to capture the East Jerusalem and the West Bank from Jordan. So this is what happened after the 1967 war. So again the hostilities continued, and after another few years in 1973, it is called the Yom Kippur War. So once again these nations attacked, but they could not make much progress. However, later on in the year 1979, Israel gave away the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt to possibly buy peace, because it was also not really defensible for them from where they were. However, the areas of Gaza Strip from Egypt, the area of West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria continue to be part of Israel. It is called the occupied territory by the Palestinians. So this is where it stands as far as Israel goes. Now let's look at Iran. So Iran, for good about half a century, that is from 1925 to 1979, was ruled by a Pahlavi dynasty. They were called the Shahs of Iran. So they ruled the country, and they were quite aligned with the West. In fact, the Sha of Iran was educated in Switzerland, so he was quite westernized, and the Iran of that time was quite modern. In fact, the women could wear Western dresses, and the Sha of Iran proclaimed a white revolution wherein he wanted to modernize the country and bring in a lot of Western influence. Now this was perhaps the reason for an uprising in Iran. So naturally, a person who's there for 50 years, he becomes high-handed, he became autocratic. So there was a huge gap between the rich and the poor because of corruption, and for that reason there was an uprising in Iran, which is called the Islamic Revolution. So it was headed by the clerics, it was headed by there was a Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the previous Ayatollah. The present one is called Ayatollah Ali Khomeini. So the previous Ayatollah became the supreme leader of the nation at the end of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and the Sha of Iran was deposed, and in fact he took exile in Egypt. He was given exile by the president of Egypt, Sadat Anwar, and then he died in exile in 1980. So ever since 1979, the Iranians have been under the Islam. It has been converted into the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the influence of the West is being eroded or being washed away, and the Iranians are being ruled more by the Islamic laws. The women have to wear a veil. So there are a lot of restrictions, and the Islamic way of life was being brought in. Now this also meant that the Iranians became anti-West, and therefore the Ayatollah Khomeini used to call the US as big Saturn and Israel as the small Saturn, and they started supporting the Palestinian movement in Israel. So when they started supporting, naturally they became anti-Israel and anti the West, and the how the support which went to them was also made kind of alive to the entire nation. And in fact it is a diktat was passed that in the holy month of Ramadan, on the last Friday, there would be processions in Iran in support of Palestinians, so that people remember that this has to be done. As also the Ayatollah Khomeini at the previous one passed a diktat that Israel has to be obliterated from the face of earth. So naturally this made Israel paranoid. Now Israel started supporting various proxies around Israel. So it has nearly about 5 proxies. One, it started supporting Hamas. It supported the Hezbollah that operated from South Lebanon. Now these the militia was being supported through Syria because of the long distance. They were being supported through Syria. Now Syria, though is a Sunni nation, it was ruled by a non-Sunni leader. His name was Bashar al-Assad. So we all aware of it, that he's been deposed and ousted last year on 8th December 2024, and because of that the route of supply to the Hezbollah has got checked. Then the other proxies are the Shia militia that operates from Iraq, as also the non-Sunnis militia that operates, which is basically the military of Assad that operated in Syria, as also the Houthis, who are again Shias that operate from Yemen. So these were the proxies that were striking Israel from all sides. Now I feel this latest war between Israel and Iran has a number of phases. The first phase started when on 7th October 2023 the Hamas terrorists crossed from Gaza Strip into Israel and carried out a massacre. They killed 1200 odd civilians. They took away about 250 civilians as hostages back to Gaza. So that gave enough reason for Israel to strike Hamas. And we have all seen it, that in the last year and a half, how almost complete of Gaza has been demolished, and naturally Hamas has gone down along with that. So this part of the problem, or this militia, has got sorted. Then they trained their guns towards the north, towards the Hezbollah, and naturally since their supply routes had got stopped because there was a regime change in Syria, naturally Hezbollah were less effective, and Israel was able to degrade them to a large extent. Their major leaders, in fact their prime leader Nasrallah, has also been killed in Beirut. So again Hezbollah has got completely or almost completely degraded. Similarly, the militia groups that were operating from Iraq as well as from Syria, they have by and large got degraded or made ineffective, and we have seen that US has been pounding Yemen, the Houthis, in the last about 3-4 months. They've done it in a very big way, and therefore they were able to degrade the Houthis again to a large extent, and therefore they were unable to now kind of participate as part of an orchestrated attack from all sides on Israel. So now Israel had all the freedom to strike Iran. That happens to be the last phase, the first phase being demolition of Gaza, then the Hezbollah in Lebanon, then the militia in Iraq and Syria, thereafter the Houthis, and finally came the turn of Iran. So the prime aim for Israel was to demolish their nuclear capability or degrade their nuclear capability, for which naturally they required the support of US. We saw that a lot of missiles were exchanged from both the sides. There were huge damages in both Israel as well as in Iran. But the major damage that happened, that degraded the nuclear facility in Iran, was when the B-2 bombers of US, they struck Iran. Those 3 nuclear sites have almost been degraded to a large extent. Even if Iran was able to take out the assets and save the nuclear fuel, etc., but still it will have to take a lot of time to set up the facility again. As also we are aware that Israel has been able to take out 9 out of the 10 scientists that were working on the nuclear program of Iran with pinpoint shootings. So therefore now Iran has been left quite toothless after what has happened lately. So now now what Iran could do back to Israel was only strike it, as also the other options that it had was, after the strike by the US, was to close the Strait of Hormuz or strike the facilities of US or the camps of US in various countries, in Qatar and Iraq and other places. Now if it closed the Strait of Hormuz also, although it had taken the decision to do so, it would naturally alienated most of the world, because we are all aware that good about 40% of Chinese energy passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Similarly, now that Russia is not supplying fuel or oil to the European countries, again the supplies are happening through the Strait of Hormuz. Even India would, although India has to a large extent diversified, but still out of the 5.5 billion barrels that we have our demand, about 1.5 to 2 million barrels pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So even we would have got affected. And therefore, since Iran did not want to buy the ire of rest of the world, it has sensibly decided not to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now it had to do some bit of face saving, and that is why it attacked the the camps of US in countries like Qatar, and the bases in Iraq has been attacked, but then there has been no real damage. So at the end of the entire 3 weeks that we had this exchange of fire, we've seen that most countries have achieved, or all the 3 major countries have achieved their goals. US has been able to degrade the nuclear facility in Iran. Israel has been able to kind of degrade most of the irritants, most of the militant groups that were striking it from all sides, including ones which were being sponsored by Iran. Iran did some face saving by telling the world that the Iron Dome of Israel is not impregnable, and it also attacked the bases of US, although again there is no real damage, but it has done some face saving by doing that. And perhaps that is the reason all the countries have now decided to go in for a ceasefire. But however, I personally feel that this ceasefire, I hope that it stays, but then even if it stays, it is going to be a troubled ceasefire. So that is my reading of the ceasefire that has happened. Hope you'll find this video useful. Thanks a lot.